Listen, when I show up, I bring cool kids with me, okay? So we have Hollywood in the house tonight. We're going to be screening the movie Gosnell before it's open, which is next month, but we've been given a real treat and the opportunity to be able to see it tonight. So I'm joined by John Sullivan, who's the executive producer of the film. So we're going to talk a little bit about the movie, and we're going to talk about some of the roadblocks that this movie had going into production. Who would think that making a movie from a realistic perspective, using courtroom transcripts and following it completely true to life, would present a problem for some in development and the media, but apparently it has. So, John, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So for those of you who don't remember, Kermit Gosnell was investigated back in 2010 and was convicted in 2013 of 3 counts of infant murder and 1 count of manslaughter. Now, if you ask the liberal media what he was, they will tell you he was a doctor. In fact, even recently, you guys had a problem with NPR just trying to buy ad space. Is that right?
That is correct. Oh, there we go. We were looking to advertise on NPR because they have, a lot of true crime stories on there. And this is a true crime story. This is, this did happen. It wasn't covered very much in the media, which I think is the first big hurdle that happened. You had wall-to-wall coverage on other serial killers, but because you had to recognize who the victims of Gosnell were, the media did not want to cover that because you had to recognize that those were children that were the victims. And so from that standpoint, that's the first thing. But with NPR, we said we wanted to call him an abortionist, and we wanted to talk about that the government and the media had covered this up. So they came back to us and they said, well, you can't use the word cover up and you can't use abortionist. And we're like, okay. Then we went back through and looked at their language that they had used amongst other abortion doctors, including Gosnell, and calling him an abortion doctor. So we said, how about if we call him an abortion doctor? And they said, not really. Why don't you call him a Philadelphia doctor?
Because he's an orthopedist, right?
Or yeah, the doctor of brotherly love, right? Quite the opposite, And so that's been just one small thing we've faced as we've worked to get this movie out.
So what a shock, right? It's a story, a true crime story, but because it happens to tell the truth about an abortionist, it happens to present a bit of a hurdle. So talk about the process of development to get this movie made. Did you encounter any roadblocks as far as distribution and funding were concerned for the movie?
We did. So the film, we knew that the movie would never get made by Hollywood. This is not a movie that Hollywood is jumping up and down to make, although it is a story that needed to be told. And so from that standpoint, that was one of the big first hurdles. But what was fantastic was Ann and Phelan, the other producers who apologized for not being able to be here tonight. They're on other screenings across the country. But they came up with the idea of crowdfunding it. And so 29,000 people gave $2.3 million to make sure that this movie was made and to tell this story.
That's incredible. That's incredible.
Real quick, do we have any of those people? Every screening we go to, we typically have people. There's one there, and I see a couple. Thank you so much for being behind us, and I hope you're proud of the movie as we are. And really thank you for standing behind us on this.
So once the movie was actually developed, what was the process to get to the point where you had widescreen, wide release media distribution? Did that present an obstacle to you?
So I did a little movie called 2016 Obama's America with Dinesh D'Souza. How many of you saw that?
A lot of people today.
So, I got a pretty good track record. I've got 3 movies that have made $60 million. So I'm kind of bankable from the documentary, nonfiction side of things. The stuff I've done has made money at the box office. So we thought, okay, we're going to be pretty good. And we had a sales agent who came on. This guy sold $250 million worth of films in the last 3 years. This guy's one of the top sales agents. He saw the movie. He loved it. He's like, this is such good quality. It tells a good story. I don't think this is going to be a problem. And I kind of snickered. thinking, okay, Dave, we'll give you a little bit of time here with this. And about 6 months later, he comes back, he goes, nobody just seems to get it. And we're like, yeah, we kind of figured that, but we took a shot that way. So, Hollywood had the chance to buy this, could have gone directly onto Netflix or an Amazon platform. Netflix is like a 50 million person platform, and they have an algorithm that recommends movies based on other movies you've seen. So guess what? If somebody's watched another serial killer or a true crime story, guess what they're going to get in their queue? Gosnell, and they're not going to expect it. So, what Zoe was talking about, we've got to subvert the culture in a smart way. So that was one of our big key things, is to make sure that this movie gets on Netflix. So we fought long and hard for over a year to make sure we got a distribution deal that had Netflix included in it, and that it would be up on Netflix once the movie comes out.
So for those of you who have not followed some of the specifics about this road to development, and John just talked about a couple of them, one of the individuals who had a problem with the movie coming out was the judge in the movie. And you're going to see his representation on screen, and I held back from saying character because he really is represented accurately. And this script was, and correct me if I'm wrong, taken largely from courtroom transcripts.
Correct.
Because there was a desire to make sure that accuracy was ensured and that it wasn't sensationalized, because at the time, no one was covering this story. In fact, there's a particular scene with a bunch of empty benches in a courtroom. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so how the whole genesis of this started to make it into a movie was Phelan McAleer was touring on another film that they had produced called Frack Nation, and he was in Pennsylvania. And Phelan's an investigative journalist who's covered murder trials and bombings in Ireland. He's from Ireland. And so what does an investigative journalist do on their day off? They go to a murder trial. And he went to the Gosnell trial. And it was Phelan and like just a couple Amish women in the back knitting, is the way he tells the story. And that was all that was there. And he just looked at these empty rows of press seats and was like, this is ridiculous. This is one of the most compelling news stories that should be around. And if journalists were doing their job, this courtroom would be full. And, that's part of what the movie's about too, is there's a dereliction of duty. We hear it called fake news. And fake news is not just when you say something fake, it's when you don't cover something. And you don't cover it for a reason.
Absolutely. That's 100% accurate. Wait, I think we're going to be joined.
If you would please, the star of Gosnell, Dean Cain.
Welcome. Have a seat.
All right, I can't fly as fast as I used to, and I apologize for that.
Wow. Well, see, I told you I brought the cool kids. We saved this best one for last, so.
All right. I wrote that in there.
Oh, you did?
The best one for last.
Good. So John and I have just been talking about the roadblocks to development, okay? So a story that is a true crime story, that's not fictionalized, that truly happened, that is based on actual court documents and actual convictions for an actual doctor, really suffered in terms of its ability to be developed. And I talked to John a little bit about that, but at what point did you get involved in the movie and realize this was something you really wanted to be a part of?
The moment I read the script. The story was fantastic and written well by Andrew Clavin, who's a fantastic screenwriter. And I read it, and it was compelling. I knew the controversial subject matter would turn off some people, but I felt like it was something that needed to be told, and I was honored to be in it. No problem at all. I said yes right away. No problem.
So for you, because you play Detective James Woods in this case, who really was the tipping point when it comes to the investigation, because this originally started out as a drug bust, right? So the clinic was investigated on potential charges of prescription drugs. So Detective James Woods goes into the clinic, and he really is sort of that seminal moment in whether or not this is going to be a drug investigation or a homicide investigation. So in order to prepare for this role, what did you have to do?
I really didn't have to do a whole lot, because the things that Detective Woods saw when he walked in that clinic is not something you could prepare yourself for. I say this sometimes, like, when we were shooting this, I even turned to our director, Nick, and I'm like, are we going a little overboard here? I mean, is this a little much? These I don't want to give away too much, but, you know, the stuff that was going on there,
Right.
I'm sure a lot of people understand already what's going in. And I was like, this can't be real. And then he showed me the actual footage from the actual raid, and it looked
Wow.
almost identical. It's so horrific that if you decided to make something horrific, you're not even scratching the surface. It's where truth is certainly much more strange than fiction. And it was shocking and it was horrifying. And the moment you see that, I don't think there's anything else you could do but go for a homicide conviction.
What were some of the stories that you encountered when you were reviewing some of this material from individuals who had been associated with the actual clinic itself? Because obviously there are pages and pages of court documents for this, and the story itself really highlights some of those aspects of individual stories of not just what happened, but the individuals to whom it happened, the people who worked at the clinic, and the individual, the female who was killed for whom Gosnell was charged with involuntary manslaughter. So there are stories surrounding it, and as you were reviewing some of this material, was there an account of someone in particular, a story of someone in particular that stood out to you more than others?
Yeah, there were, and there was one story in particular, but I don't want to really give it away at this point in time. You know, that's the thing that's about this film that makes so much sense is you can talk about the large aspects of this is what happened and it was awful, and you know there are possibly hundreds of victims, thousands of victims, and it's just so giant, so macro, you can't get a real grip on it. But when you start hearing the individual stories, that is always what brings us as an audience and as human beings in. When you understand one person's plight, well, we have a dozen of those stories. You can't service them all in one film. So we picked a number of them. The one that got me is one of the nurses who saw things that, and she finally had to tell what she saw, and it's horrific. Again, you're not going to see gory stuff. Tonight's not gory things that you're going to see, but you'll understand what took place and what was being seen, and it's extremely powerful and moving. She was one story that really stuck out with me. Again, of a handful. I don't want to give away anything, so hopefully I didn't give away too much there.
Well, I was actually talking to John backstage, and I've seen the movie, so you don't have to worry about giving anything away, but I will say that the movie does an excellent job of walking that fine line between the accuracy of what was happening and showing just enough and not going so far overboard as to be difficult for people to watch, because really the whole motivation to make the film was to get it in front of eyes, to get it in front of audiences who would recognize that the media is not always accurate, shock and awe, number one, and number two, there are crimes being perpetrated in the country on, among other individuals, these women who go into abortion clinics thinking they're being helped when in fact they are being severely harmed. And as we know, and there are many experts who'll be speaking tomorrow on this, who a good friend of mine is our director of the Center for Life and Women's Advocacy, and she and I have talked at length about this, of the fact that this really impacts women not only at the time they go through it, but for the rest of their lives. If they're not able to deal with that pain, it is not a victimless crime. So this movie does really an excellent job of walking that line between what needs to be showed to show that horrificness, and at the same time being discreet enough and being artistic enough to let the viewer's mind imagine the rest, which is horrific in and of itself.
Absolutely horrific. I mean, of course, you can go online and see some of the images and things like that if you really want to see the specifics. But it's once you see it, you can't unsee it, and it's things that you would never forget. And we felt, and I think rightly so, and Nick and John and everybody were, like we don't need to see that. I believe when the jury was shown something, they react very strongly. They're shown some real things, and we saved that moment, and it is very powerful.
It is extremely powerful, and that's actually a story I did not know, that what they're looking at is actual imagery from the investigation, because you cannot fake the reactions on the face of those extras who played the jurors in that scene. It is very, very powerful. So I want to talk a little bit about Hollywood's culture. And
that'll only take a second.
I want to sort of dovetail on what Zoe said to us before about Christians in culture. Now, I am a bit of a cinephile, okay? Probably tending toward dork about some of this stuff, but my brother got his master's in film from Chapman University, so he used to make movies in our basement. We were very nerdy children, so actually I probably should not have shared that in a public forum, but we'll just roll on right past that. But I want to talk about what the Hollywood Reporter just reported. Now, this is a recent piece from the Hollywood Reporter, understanding that Gosnell opens next month. Here's how the Hollywood Reporter describes it. The film gets its title from a 2014 grand jury report that accuses the doctor of killing hundreds of newborns over the course of several decades in Philadelphia, though he was convicted of just 3. Just convicted of 3. Those are just the criminal convictions for 3. So we understand now what we're dealing with. What is the answer to the patent left-wing bias and the leftist connection between Hollywood and politics?
Can I jump on this one?
Oh,
Please, because I don't know what to say on that one. Education.
How do we solve it? How do we solve this problem?
Well, and this is going to sound a little self-serving, but it's true. There's other movies coming out, and I say do the same thing. You have to support these movies, and you have to.
Hear, hear.
And you have to support them opening weekend. And if I can for just a moment, people ask me, oh, you got in the film business and all this and that. I didn't ever want to get in the film business. I had an opportunity at like 20. I was recruited by Paramount and William Morris to come work there, and I didn't want to do it. I did not want to work in the film business. I work in the cultural change business that happens to be film. And what I mean by that is I specifically look at films that go theatrical because it's an asymmetrical warfare model, because that is the pinnacle and apex of all popular culture. Everything, every magazine rack you see, everything like that, it all comes from the movie star down through that. Every musician wants to be a movie star. Every TV actor wants to be a movie star. Everybody wants to be a movie star. And so from that standpoint, we have to support these theatrical movies to show, and basically, you know, it can be a protest vote. You can say, oh, whatever, voting with your values that way, with your $10 down there, but you've got to come out opening weekend and support, not just our movie, you got to support all these movies in that way.
Dean, have you taken heat for being in this movie? Have you taken pressure on Twitter, on Instagram? And I know the answer to this question, but I want to hear you say it anyway.
Yes. Absolutely. I take that sort of heat and abuse every single day, but it doesn't bother me in the least, and it's something. I have an 18-year-old son, and I try to explain to him. He goes, Dad, how can you, doesn't that make you mad to hear that? And it doesn't make me mad. It just shows people's intolerance. It shows their intolerance towards listening to another opinion. It's funny because, you know, just the fact that I'm here, people were blowing me up all day long, and with the most ridiculous things that you could ever hear. And you know, talk about tolerance. It's ridiculous. So I take heat. I don't. It doesn't bother me. I welcome it because I sleep well at night. And I know I'm doing something that matches my convictions and my heart, and I'll happily defend the things that I say and the things that I stand for.
Oh my gosh. I'm so glad to hear you all clapping because I have one hand tied up at the moment. Particularly for actors and actresses, you guys have such a high hurdle to overcome because it is expected that people who are in the industry are all going to subscribe to this leftist groupthink. So I would imagine for individuals like you who say, you know what, I'm going to make a movie, true crime, not fictionalized, by the way, but I'm going to make an accurate picture about what transpired in Philadelphia back in 2010. To take heat for that it's unconscionable, right? It runs counter to all of our fundamental free speech ideals. So you all have had to take really particularly hard stands because you're the face of the industry. You are the people who are out there making the movies, who are starring in the movies, who are starring in the television shows. And I find it very interesting that being here, you have also taken some heat, but worth a second round of applause, if I do say so myself.
I'll say this: if the film turns out to be very, very successful, and people come out and see the film, I'll take more heat. There's no question about it. I will get
Fabulous.
more heat because now if there's actually an audience that goes and sees this, they're going to want to attack me. They're going to want to attack us further and further, and that's okay. That's one another one I'm happy to take. You were going to say something, John. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. I would highly recommend Nick Searcy, who directs the movie. He also plays the defense lawyer.
And he's not tough on Twitter at all.
Yeah, if you don't.
That's one I have to follow now.
But Nick wrote an article, and I recommend you take a look at it. It's called Why I Did It, and he talks about why he directed Gosnell. And he talks about the heat he's going to take from, going to the country club and playing golf with all these people and seeing him on set and all this stuff. But for Dean and for, Nick and for Zoe, for all of our cast, this was a brave movie to do, and they do deserve to be applauded. And I think once you see them in the film, too, you're going to applaud for that. So we're very proud of the movie, and we're very proud of the cast for what they brought to the screen.
Yes, please applaud. I'm so encouraged by people who are supporters of the arts as not only owned by the liberal bastion of Stalinist individuals who happen to populate most of the West Coast. All right, so in the couple minutes we have left, I want to ask each of you, what do you hope the movie accomplishes? Dean, I'll ask you first.
I hope it educates and enlightens people. I think that a lot of people hear the term abortion. I said the word. I'm not allowed to say NPR. We couldn't advertise with that word.
We couldn't say that word.
But I said the word. I didn't say female reproductive rights. I said abortion, and that's the word that is so awful and terrible. But for people to hear that word, it's one thing. Another thing to see what actually takes place and see what happens to people who are in the position that these young ladies are in with a doctor like that who takes advantage of them. Understand that there's a lot more to that and try to educate themselves. That's what I hope they do.
John.
I think for us, it's telling the story. It's recognizing these victims who have never been heard except for this movie, and being recognized. And I think you'll see there's a very powerful scene in the film that talks about that. But for us, it was just, there was a dereliction of duty with the journalists who did not cover this movie. And this is a correction to that. And it's a statement that way. And also, and I don't say this selfishly, I hope this is a success. Because I hope that then
Absolutely.
Other movies can get made. That's why I got into this business and make the movies that I do, is that so other filmmakers can come along, not just me. It needs to be, I think of it like a waterfall, and like I'm one drop of water in that waterfall. We need a waterfall, and we need you to help us to make that waterfall happen. And we really do need you to come out opening weekend.
So I can tag on to that. You all are being given a treat because you are Values Voter Summit guests, and we're so glad to have you here. You will get to see it before it comes out, but I want to encourage you, go to gosnellmovie.com, if I have that
Correct.
accurately.
Yep.
Okay, so find a theater near you. Take your friends, take your families.
Or your church.
Or your church, your Bible study, your family policy council. Take them, go, support films like this, support actors like Dean, support producers like John. We want to take back a part of the culture that they think we are not interested in. So, ladies and gentlemen, will you please thank Dean and John for joining me tonight?
Thank you all. Thank you all for being here. We should be thanking you, for real.